Good afternoon and welcome to part 1 of the XJ40 coil and ignition amplifier replacement. This particular exercise is appropriate for the 3.6 litre model. 4 litre models may be slightly different. Now, I purchased a brand new coil and a brand new OEM spec ignition amplifier, also sometimes referred to as an igniter, but most likely an ignition amplifier. The amplifier itself came in this rather nice Jaguar Heritage bag, mounted onto this nice piece of aluminium. There are no discernible manufacturer markings on the actual amplifier itself, so I'm dubious as to whether it will work very well or not. The coil itself is a rather nice Lucas branded item, in this rather nice typical green Lucas box, which I'll be keeping for posterity reasons. It's quite nice. And the item itself is one of the Lucas Sport coils, apparently suitable for the XJ40 3.6, and it's what we're going to be installing in part 2 of this video. In part 1 we're going to be covering removal of the coil, removal of the igniter, and also addressing some of the issues that we've come up against along the way, which is only to be expected on a car that has had these items installed for the past 30 years. So the coil itself, you can't get the coil. You also get the screw attachments, and the coil is actually on its own mounting bracket. The original coil comes with a mounting bracket as well, but it's unlikely that I'll have to reuse that, given that the coil here actually has a mounting bracket. Onto the job itself. Now, I've positioned the camera looking at the inner wing area, so the driver's side inner wing. That'll be the right hand side of the car if you're looking at it from the back. Now, really I'm just disconnecting a few of these multi-plugs just to give myself an extra little bit of room. And I've noticed that my valve block here is actually, over the years, has actually come away from its mounting points. So the mounting point metal bracket there actually mounts to another point on the inner wing. And just literally over the years it's just come away, so that's another thing to add to my list of items to replace, because I don't exactly want it wobbling around. Temporarily I will secure it with some cable ties just to keep it from getting damaged or moving around too much. Now, the first low tension coil bolt, or nut rather, is a standard 10mm nut, and that one actually came off very easily. The second one is an 8mm nut, and when removing this one, the coil itself actually, how can I put this? The coil itself, the mounting terminal on the coil actually sheared off of the coil. So that sort of does give me some sort of positive indication that the coil has quite possibly seen better days. I mean, if you're looking at an 8mm post, 8mm bracket mounting post on the coil itself, that is actually going to shear off that easily. The rest of the coil is not really going to be in top-notch order. The coil itself is held onto a mounting plate with two 8mm bolts, and we'll be getting into those bolts shortly. At this present stage I was actually just trying to see if I could actually still get that low tension terminal off in situ. Turns out I actually cannot, so we're now moving on, as you can see, to getting the 8mm socket out and removing both those 8mm bolts, which will free the coil up enough to allow me to remove the nut on the actual low tension post. So moving on to that second bolt there. Now, you may notice I don't currently have my radiator shroud fitted. This came about quite a number of years ago when I actually had for a short time a electric fan setup on there, which I made myself out of an old Saab 9000 electric fan. I used the redundant circuitry for the air conditioning condenser fan, which would normally sit around the front of the radiator. It worked fairly well, but then I got to a point where I wanted to return the car to standard, so I put the original viscous coupling fan back on, and I've got to put the shroud back on, which I will get round to doing at some point. So as you can see here, the post there is, well, it's seen better days. That whole coil has seen better days. So we are looking at a coil that is about 30 years old, so it is likely to have seen better days. Seems to be my phrase of the week, that one. So you've obviously got the space clear. Now you can see just below, actually just between the distributor cap and the valve block, a mounting plate. The mounting plate itself has an earthing wire on it in about the centre, which you need to unscrew, and that will come out, and I've actually sort of taken that one out to give it a bit of a clean up and actually a repaint. So that'll be coming up in the next video. This particular plate is held in with a couple of crosshead screws. Oh, sorry, the earthing strap wire is held in with a couple of crosshead screws rather, so we're just removing that one now. But the ignition amplifier itself is held in with a series of crosshead screws. They managed to come out okay, but the earthing strap, which actually mounts onto the ignition amplifier itself, did not come off that easily. So that's one that I've had to address with a little bit of chopping and joining the wires together. We'll be covering that shortly. So once you've got the plate removed, you do then have access to actually get to the rest of the ignition amplifier. The ignition amplifier itself is mounted onto a piece of aluminium. In between the ignition amplifier and the piece of aluminium is some heat transfer paste. Now, I'm not certain, but I think you might be able to use the same sort of heat transfer paste that you have on a computer CPU, between a computer CPU and the heatsink. So in this case I actually removed my ignition amplifier because I wanted to see a little bit more detail as regards the part number. The amp itself is actually a GM amplifier, so I'm just removing it there. That little mounting bracket there for the one of the plugs did not come away that easily. In fact, it hasn't come away at all. So that'll be something I'll need to address in the next episode, where I actually drill out the screw which is holding it in. Now I wanted to carefully remove the wiring plug, so what I actually did was, because I know I'm not going to be using this amplifier again, but what I actually did was to unscrew the amplifier from that mounting plate, and that actually gave me ample access to just get a flat blade screwdriver into the terminals and gradually carefully remove the terminals itself. Now I noted that there is some grease inside the multi-plug itself which I need to clean out. This would have been put in originally probably to sort of prevent any moisture ingress, and I will be putting something in to sort of help, possibly silicone grease or something like that. I'm not sure actually, I'll have to look that up. So I want something that will still allow the terminals to make a connection but will prevent any water ingress, possibly Vaseline. So just zooming in there on the product number, that's 6697B25. That's a General Motors part, so it may actually be worth looking that up. So you may actually be able to get a far cheaper replacement if you use one of the GM sourced items. So I tried actually removing the earth strap, which is connected currently to this piece of aluminium, but that did not work. I also tried removing the centre bolt from the clip which holds the wiring connector, but that also did not sort of yield any positive inroads. So at the moment I've left this to one side, and I've actually gone back indoors with my new amplifier, and I've managed to find this piece of wire which has a couple of spade connectors on either end. This piece of wire itself actually came from one of my spare video recorders, which I've dismantled, and it's in my box of VCR spares for the particular video recorder that I wanted the spares for. I think this one was from a Hitachi VT11E, of which I have 3 or 4 VT11Es, so it was quite useful to have one that was a duffer, which I use for spares, but that's another story for another day. Now, I actually found that the screw from a PC case fitted in there quite well. It allows certainly the spade connector there to connect in and sort of sit quite flushly on the surface. And it certainly sort of resolved the issue for me on this particular instance. Now, what I did next really is a temporary fix until I get the soldering iron and shrink wrapping covery stuff out. So that's basically that sort of shrink wrap stuff that you use to ignite, sort of put over and heat up. What I actually did was I put on this bullet connector, which I've crimped down, made sure that it's firmly in place, and that seems to have actually sort of gone on there quite nicely. So as you can see, you can put the other end of it onto there, and when we get back to the car in the second part of this video, we will be refitting that to the other end of the earthing connector. The next stage is I had that bracket from earlier which the distributor was mounted to, and I thought that I would give it a bit of a spruce up for putting it back on the car. Now, I don't have any Kerrust available, it's something I need to get hold of, but what I have done is I've removed with some rough, pretty sort of strong grade sandpaper, the excess surface paint and the excess surface rust. Now, what I did next was I just put a bit of baking powder on this and then tipped on some white vinegar. I'm not sure if this will work, but it will be interesting to see if the vinegar will actually either neutralise or strip off the excess rust that is on there. And then what I can then do is actually just wash this down with some of the water that collects in my dehumidifier, and then obviously once it's fully dried off, give it a bit of a dry down, and then give it a spray down with some satin black paint, let it dry, and then refit it to the car. It'll just look a lot nicer in the engine bay, and you know, whilst it's all off, it is something that's definitely worth doing. So I'm going to leave this for 24 hours and then come back to it probably tomorrow, when we will continue the actual series of getting the coil and ignition amplifier replaced. I'd like to thank you very much once again for taking the time to watch the video, and if you would like to subscribe for more upcoming fascinating hobbies, you know what to do. Also, if you like this video, don't forget to hit that like button, and again, hit subscribe for more upcoming fascinating, utterly fascinating hobbies. Thanks for watching.